What happens when a man comes back to his ranch after days away, expecting nothing more than the comfort of land that has carried his family's name for half a century, only to be treated like an intruder by the very neighbors who live because his fences hold the line? What happens when the woman with the clipboard, the one who thinks bylaws outrank deeds, dials 911 and paints a false picture of trespass without realizing the man she just accused doesn't only own this dirt, he oversees every HOA in the United States? That man was Lawrence Duvall. And this is the story of the day his quiet return collided with one neighbor's arrogance, a couple of squad cars, and a truth so big it made the entire subdivision stand still. The late Texas sun hadn't yet reached its harsh burn when Lawrence eased his silver Ford down the narrow county road. Dust swirled in the rear view like memory refusing to settle. He had been gone 3 days, Phoenix meetings that stretched too long, hotel coffee that tasted like cardboard, hours of conference rooms where strangers in suits argued over lines and policies they barely understood. But now he was home, or at least he thought he was. The ranch stretched before him, fences weathered but standing, pasture rippling in amber waves under the morning breeze. The gate looked the same as always, steel bars, padlock that bore his father's scratches from years of use, chain that had rattled against it since the Carter administration. Lawrence cut the engine, stepped out, and felt that first familiar crunch of gravel under his boots. He breathed in the scent of cedar and hay, heavy with warmth, steady like the heartbeat of the land. He reached for the key, a key his father had carried, the same one he himself had used thousands of times. The lock clicked open like it was happy to see him. He swung the gate wide, climbed back into the truck, and rolled through. The moment should have been simple, uneventful, a return to roots. But across the cul-de-sac, someone was watching. Janice Kettering, early 60s. Hair cut sharp into a bob that never bent with the wind. Khaki slacks pressed like she'd ironed them twice. Sunglasses oversized enough to reflect the entire driveway back at itself. And in her hand, a phone that knew how to dial 911 faster than she knew her own neighbors. Her lips pursed as the truck disappeared behind the gate. Her hand tightened on the leash of a yapping terrier. Her heart decided suspicion was more convenient than curiosity. And so she dialed. Yes, hello? This is Janice Kettering, Willow Point Subdivision. I'd like to report a suspicious man driving through the gate at the ranch at the end of the street. Yes, that one. He doesn't belong there. Big silver truck, jacket. He looked well. Let's just say he didn't look like he owns land around here. Please send someone quickly. Her voice softened as if secrecy gave weight to her words. Her tone sharpened when she described his posture, his truck, his jacket, every surface detail except the truth. Meanwhile, Lawrence parked by the barn. The wood creaked as he opened the door, the smell of dust and leather filling his lungs. 2. Horses nudged their heads over the rails, and he patted them like friends who don't care if you're late as long as you come back. He took off his jacket, hung it on a nail, and crouched to check the feed bins. The world shrank to the rhythm of chores, and for a moment the noise of Phoenix evaporated. His phone buzzed. He ignored it. For the first time in days, he wasn't thinking about bylaws, hearings, or board disputes. He was home. Or at least he thought so. 15 minutes later, red and blue flickered against the barn wall. Lawrence stepped out into the open, frowning at the glow bouncing off windows in the subdivision. 2 patrol cars rolled to a stop at the gate, gravel crunching under their weight. Curtains shifted in houses up the slope. Kids abandoned scooters to stare. Phones rose in hands like periscopes. The quiet cul-de-sac was no longer quiet. It was a theater waiting for a play. One deputy, younger, buzz-cut sharp, spoke into his radio before opening the door. The other, older, broad-shouldered, eyes steady from decades of late-night calls, scanned the property with the caution of a man who'd seen small suspicions spiral into big problems. "Sir," the younger one called, voice professional but firm. Mind telling us what you're doing on this property? Lawrence blinked. The words settled in the air, heavier than the heat. What I'm doing, he said slowly. I live here. This is my land. The older deputy approached, posture measured. We got a call from a neighbor reporting suspicious activity. Possible trespasser. Suspicious? Lawrence repeated, voice even but edged. Unlocking my own gate? Feeding my horses? That's suspicious? Janice's voice sliced through the still air from behind her fence. Officers! I told you, I've lived here 15 years, and I've never seen this man once. He doesn't belong here. Her words carried across the yards like nails across glass. Neighbors shifted uncomfortably. Some nodded, some frowned. All of them watched. Lawrence reached into his pocket, pulled out his wallet, and held his license steady in the air. My name is Lawrence Duval. My father passed this land to me. My name is on the deed. You can check county records if you like. You want proof? I'll get the tax bills, the ownership documents. They're in my truck. The older deputy stepped forward, took the ID, studied it quietly. The younger shifted uneasily, radio still at his shoulder. Janice scoffed loud enough for everyone to hear. Papers can be faked. You can't just take his word for it. Lawrence clenched his jaw, but his eyes stayed steady. Ma'am, you don't know me. You don't know my family. Yet you stand there saying I don't belong on land. We've worked for 50 years. Tell me, what exactly do you think someone who belongs looks like? The question hung heavy. For the first time, Janice faltered. Her lips parted, then pressed shut again. The younger deputy glanced at his partner. The crowd shifted, whispers, rippling like restless grass. Lawrence didn't need to press further. The silence was enough. But the tension stretched taut, ready to snap. Do you have proof of ownership? The older deputy asked. Paperwork? Deed? Tax bill? Lawrence exhaled through his nose. Fine, give me a minute. Every eye followed him as he walked to his truck, opened the glove compartment, and pulled out a blue folder. Inside, insurance papers, tax statements, photographs of surveys, certified copies of deeds. He carried them back slowly, deliberately, like a man who knew evidence shouldn't be rushed. He laid the folder on the hood of the patrol car. The older deputy opened it, flipped through, nodded once, twice. The younger leaned over, jaw loosening, as the official stamps spoke louder than any neighbor. Mr. Duval, the older deputy said, voice lower now, this checks out. But Janice wasn't done. Officers, don't be fooled. Anyone can stage paperwork. How do we know he really owns it? Where's he been all these years? Why don't any of us know him? Lawrence straightened, his voice steady, his shoulders squared. You want to know where I've been? He paused. Let the weight of the crowd lean in. I've been in boardrooms, hearings, conferences, because I don't just live on this ranch. I'm the executive director overseeing homeowner associations across this country. Every HOA, every board, every covenant you've ever cited, it crosses my desk. Gasps rippled. Phones tilted higher. Even the deputies exchanged a glance. Janice's mouth opened, but no words came out. And for the first time, the cul-de-sac realized the man they'd tried to write out of his own land was the very man who wrote the rules they lived under. The silence that followed Lawrence's revelation wasn't ordinary silence. It was the kind that rearranges the air, the kind that makes neighbors clutch their phones tighter because suddenly they realize they might be recording history instead of gossip. The younger deputy shifted on his boots, his radio lowering slightly. Executive director? He asked, voice cracking just enough to betray surprise. Lawrence didn't flinch. He met the deputy's eyes with calm, steady enough to drown the flashing lights. Yes, National Homeowner Association Board. Every HOA in this country answers up the chain. That chain ends with me. A ripple ran through the crowd. A woman near the back muttered, "That can't be true." A teenager whispered to his friend, "Google it later." Phones zoomed in closer, trying to catch every syllable, every twitch of Janice's face. Janice, for her part, stood frozen, then snapped herself back like pride slapping her across the cheek. "That's absurd," she barked. "You expect us to believe that? If you were who you say you are, why don't you show up at meetings? Why don't you introduce yourself like a decent neighbor instead of sneaking around barns?" Lawrence let her words hang. Then slowly, deliberately, he stepped forward until the timber fence divided them by nothing more than air. His boots, pressed into dirt that had belonged to his father, his grandfather, and now him. "I don't need to introduce myself to validate my existence on my own land," he said. His voice was calm, but steel laced every word. "This isn't a stage. It's my home. My name has been on this deed longer than your subdivision has existed, longer than your bylaws, longer than your clipboard." Gasps whispered again. Some neighbors nodded faintly. Others avoided his gaze, but Janice wasn't ready to fold. She never was. "Officers!" she snapped, turning her body toward them as if sheer force could redirect the law. "Are you going to let him intimidate me like this? He's threatening me in front of witnesses." The older deputy closed the folder and handed it back to Lawrence. His jaw moved as though weighing words carefully. "Ma'am, nothing I've seen here suggests trespass. Mr. Duval's ownership checks out." But Janice didn't hear it. Or maybe she didn't want to. "This is unacceptable. He disappears for years, nobody knows him, then suddenly he comes back with some story about being the big boss of HOAs? Please. This sounds like a scam." Lawrence chuckled, not a laugh of humor, but one of disbelief. "A scam?" he repeated. He turned to the deputies. "Gentlemen, you can pull records, national HOA board filings, my name, my signature, my policies. It's all there." "Sir," the younger deputy said carefully, "with respect, why would someone with that kind of authority live here, in a subdivision ranch?" Lawrence's eyes softened for the first time. He glanced at the barn, the horses, the fence posts, weathered by storms and summers. "Because titles don't feed the soul," he said quietly. "This land does." The older deputy's expression flickered. Respect, recognition. He'd seen pride before, but rarely pride without arrogance. But Janice was already pulling her phone higher, recording herself now like a self-appointed anchorwoman. "You hear this?" she said into the camera. "This man is trying to fool our neighborhood, claims he owns the pond, the barn, and now every HOA in America. Lies, and these deputies are just standing by." Her dog barked, yapping at the growing crowd. Neighbors exchanged uneasy glances. A man in a baseball cap leaned toward his wife. "That's Duval land. Always has been." His wife nodded but said nothing. Lawrence folded the folder under his arm and spoke loud enough for the entire street. "You want to know the truth? I don't need to trick anyone. I don't need to bluff. I have what matters, proof. Proof of this land. Proof of my role. Proof stronger than rumor or suspicion." He looked directly at Janice. "What do you have? A clipboard? A phone? A suspicion you dressed up as fact?" For once, Janice's mouth opened with no words waiting. The silence that followed wasn't his, it was hers. The younger deputy cleared his throat, uncomfortable. "Mrs. Kettering," he said carefully, "we've verified ownership. Unless there's evidence of a crime, this matter is closed." But Janice spun toward him like a storm refusing to lose strength. "Closed? You think this is closed? Do you have any idea how dangerous it is to let people like him walk around unchecked? We don't know where he's been. We don't know what he's hiding." Lawrence stepped forward again. His voice cut through her tirade, not loud but precise. "You want to know where I've been?" He paused, scanning the faces, watching every phone tilt closer. I've been writing the rules you live under, every fine you've ever argued, every covenant you've ever cited. It all traces back to my office. You think you know power? Because you chair a shoreline committee? Power isn't a clipboard. Power is the signature at the bottom of the bylaw you think protects you. The words hit like thunder. Neighbors whispered. Phones shook. The younger deputy muttered under his breath, "Holy hell!" The older one nodded slightly, as if confirming to himself that sometimes the truth doesn't need a badge to stand tall. Janice tried one last time. Even if that's true, you still don't get to waltz in here and act like you're above. The community! We have rules! Rules I oversee, Lawrence said. Rules that exist because I sign them. And you want to lecture me about rules? The crowd erupted. Some gasped. Some chuckled. Some simply stared, realizing they'd never once questioned who made the laws they fought about at every HOA meeting. Lawrence held the silence. He didn't need to shout. The truth was loud enough. Respect, he said finally. That's all this was ever about. Respect for land, respect for neighbors, respect for truth. And today, Mrs. Kettering, you showed none of it. Her face flushed crimson. She tugged her dog's leash, turned sharply, and stormed back toward her house without another word. The crowd parted. Some followed her with their eyes, shaking their heads. Others turned their phones back to Lawrence, hungry for what he'd say next. But he didn't grandstand. He simply gathered his folder, patted the barn wall, and whispered so quietly only the horses heard, "Welcome home." The deputies climbed back into their cruisers. The older one tipped his hat slightly. As he passed, a gesture that meant more than paperwork ever could. The younger one gave a small nod, half apology, half respect. Engines hummed, lights dimmed, the cul-de-sac exhaled. But the story wasn't over, not even close. Because by the time neighbors uploaded their shaky videos, the internet would feast on them. And when the truth of who Lawrence Duval really was spread beyond Willow Point Drive, this small confrontation would become something bigger, something no HOA Karen could control. Night fell like a curtain that didn't know the show wasn't over. The red and blue were gone, but the glow stayed inside the phones, inside the whispers, inside the part of a neighborhood that loves rules more than people. Clips started blooming, on group chats before the streetlights even warmed up. One video caught the exact moment Lawrence said, "I oversee every HOA in this country." Another had Janice's voice sharp as a paper cut. "He doesn't look like the type who owns land here." The captions wrote themselves. The comments did what comments do. Inside the barn, Lawrence poured a flake of hay like he'd taught himself to pour calm. He let the horses nuzzle his sleeve and listened to the simple sounds. Hooves shifting, leather straps settling, the soft hush of an animal that never needed a committee to feel like it belonged. His phone buzzed on the nail by the door. He didn't look until the second buzz. This time it wasn't email, it was a number he recognized from board rosters, the kind that showed up when suburban drama forgot it was small. "Mr. Duval?" A voice trying to be official and neighborly at once. "Gerald Pike here, HOA president." Lawrence leaned a shoulder to the stall and watched dust drift like tired snow. "Evening, Mr. Pike. We'd like to get ahead of misunderstandings," Gerald said, picking his way across vowels like they might be slippery. "Emergency session in the clubhouse tomorrow noon. Open floor. We'll give you time." "Good," Lawrence said. "Bring your governing documents, your plat, and an empty chair where humility is supposed to sit." Gerald laughed in a way that sounded like a wince. Understood. When he hung up, another message lit the screen short. Honest. "This is Holt. For what it's worth, you handled it right." He stared at it, thumb hovering, the way a man stares at a door that used to be locked. He typed back, "Thanks. See you tomorrow?" 3 dots. Then, off duty, sitting in the back like a neighbor. Morning did what morning always does to panic. It made it look more obvious. The street was quieter, but people's eyes weren't. A few waved like they'd always waved. A few waved like it cost them. Janice's blinds were closed to the degree that suggested a person inside gathering arguments like twigs before a storm. At 11:55, the clubhouse parking lot looked like a Sunday church lot, golf carts tucked in like they were learning to be small. Inside, the room tried for dignity, stackable chairs, a sagging ficus, a flag that had been asked to make too many rooms feel like a courthouse. On the far wall, a corkboard mess of flyers, neighborhood watch potluck, lost tabby, pool schedule, and a glossy print of bylaws in a frame someone dusted too often. Gerald stood at a table with a gavel he used only on agendas, and self-esteem. The treasurer, softer-eyed than the job allowed, lined up a neat stack of papers. Janice entered with her clipboard like it was a shield and a story at once. She'd chosen a new shade of lipstick. It hadn't chosen her back. Lawrence arrived last. No entourage. No performance. Just the blue folder under his arm and a flat, calm in his face that said the land had already decided who he was. "Call to order," Gerald said, tapping the wood. People looked up as if they'd been given permission to pay attention. "We're here," Gerald continued, "to address the incident yesterday. We want to—" Janice rose like the sentence owed her a ride. "We're here because a stranger claims to own what this community uses, and he claims to be, what, the emperor of HOAs?" A scoff, practiced. "We need to protect our standards." Lawrence didn't take the bait. He unrolled a certified plat map on a portable easel the club used for fall craft nights, clipped it at the corners, and turned it toward the room. Lines, measures, a fence that remembered things people didn't want to. Before. "We protect anything," he said. "Let's agree on where protection is allowed to stand." He tapped the thick black line around the ranch, then the thinner line that marked the subdivision's common parcels. He traced the gate, the cul-de-sac, the corner where kids always cut the grass even when signs begged them not to. Then he set 3 documents on the table: the deed, the tax bill, the original county stamp on a 20-year-old plat that still smelled faintly of toner and bureaucracy. "You don't have to like me," he said, voice steady, filling corners. "You don't even have to remember my name, but you will respect a record that existed before your newsletter." Hands went up. Voices tried to go over each other like narrow bridges. A woman with silver hair, the one who had said last night that everyone knew the Duval land, stood without, raising her hand. "Janice," she said, not asking permission from anyone when she chose the name. "You made a mistake. You called the cops on a neighbor. You dragged us into it when a knock would have done. We can admit that and move on. Or we can pretend it didn't happen until it happens worse." Janice's smile thinned, then sharpened. "We have rules, Eleanor. We enforce them. If we start giving special treatment—" "Special treatment?" Another voice, the baseball cap man from the fence line. "He showed papers. You showed a hunch." Holt slipped into a back chair and sat like a man trying not to be a character. Bradley, the younger, slid in beside him with a ball cap that didn't entirely hide a haircut that said he still stood straighter than most. Gerald rapped the gavel gently. "Please, let's stay productive." He nodded at Lawrence. "You said there were clarifications?" Lawrence held up a thin binder stamped with an office seal most people ignored until they needed it. "You all file annual reports with the state," he said. "Your covenants and amendments get recorded. When those come up for national standardization, they cross my desk." Janice snorted. Small, mean. "We're a local association. You don't touch our rules." Lawrence turned a page to a cover letter. An old one. The room quieted at the sight of letterhead the color of seriousness. He slid the page to Gerald. "You submitted a revision to architectural review procedures in 2016. The letter you got back? You signed for it? You probably didn't read who signed it." Gerald squinted, lips moving. The name landed on him like a shadow that felt familiar, and knew at once. He looked up slowly. "Duval." Janice opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. That proves nothing. It proves enough, Lawrence said. Enough to stop pretending I made up my job in a driveway. Bradley shifted, looking at Holt like a kid waiting for a nod he didn't need. Holt kept his eyes forward. He didn't need to say anything. The room had finally found volume without him. I'm not here to punish you, Lawrence said. I'm here to keep yesterday from repeating with someone who doesn't have a blue folder and a patient temper. He set the folder down, then held up an HOA violation slip, yesterday's work, printed in red like embarrassment. First order. Rescind the trespass citation you waved around in your group chat. It's void. You know it. I know it. Gerald nodded, almost relieved. Consider it rescinded. Second, Lawrence continued, calm like a road you don't deserve but get to walk. Before anyone dials 911 for suspicious person again, you will verify the property line and attempt contact. You will write a policy that says so. It will be plain enough that a teenager can read it and a lawyer can't twist it into something it wasn't. Murmurs. Good ones. The kind that sound like a room finding its notes. Third, he said, I want your board to schedule an open map night. Project the plat. Invite the county. Every homeowner will leave knowing where the HOA stops and where deeds begin. Label. The lines in language that doesn't pretend ownership out of thin air. Janice lifted her clipboard as if it held a counter-argument. It didn't. She went with the only move left. What about respect for the rules? What about noise? What about standards? We can't have a racetrack in the middle of a neighborhood. You can enforce noise, Lawrence said evenly. On what you own. You can cite the neighbor blasting. Music on your greenbelt. You can't police a man carrying hay across his yard because you don't like the sound boots make. You can enforce architectural guidelines. You can't order someone to repaint a barn they've maintained since before. You knew this road had a name. Eleanor smiled at that, small, private. Because history loves being seen. And fourth, Lawrence added, his voice dropping half a step, you will stop using suspicion as a shortcut for curiosity. Bradley, without meaning to, nodded like he'd just heard something he'd been, trying to say to himself since yesterday. Janice's last card was anger, and she played it with a flourish. And what gives you the right to dictate terms? Because you say you're important? Because you waved some letter we can't verify in our faces? Because you're good with phrases and people clap when you talk about respect? No, Lawrence said, because your bylaws say your board will submit changes to the governing authority. Because your reports arrive at an office that signs off when they're compliant. Because that signature is mine. And because yesterday you turned police into props for your pride. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It landed. Gerald rubbed his forehead like the act might erase a week. We're not here to fight, he said. We're here to fix. The treasurer, Maya, her name tag confessed, lifted her hand, with a courage that comes from people who balance books while others balance egos. Before we vote, she said, I need to disclose something. Eyes turned. She swallowed. We ordered signage last month. New no trespassing placards for the ranch border. I signed the invoice. She looked at Lawrence. I didn't. No. I should have asked. I'm sorry. Lawrence's expression didn't change much, but it softened in the corners. Thank you, he said. Cancel it. Or put them somewhere they belong, on your property. We'll eat the cost, Maya said, already pulling a pen, already writing her own accountability down so it wouldn't slip away. Holt's phone buzzed. He turned it face down without looking. The room was learning to do one thing at a time. Gerald looked out at the rows. All in favor of rescinding the citation, publishing a property line policy before contacting law enforcement, and hosting an open map session with county participation, show hands. Hands rose. Not all. Enough. More than enough. Opposed? A few. Fewer than pride allows on a good day. Motion carries. Gerald said. The gavel sounded less like a hammer and more like a sigh. It could have ended there, in a decent place, with a community climbing down from a tree it had no business in. But Janice's spine didn't know how to bend. She stood again, chin high, clipboard held like a fragile certainty. "This is a mistake," she said. "You let one outsider rewrite how we handle safety. You think the internet will clap for you? Maybe for a day, and then you'll have to live with the precedent. Anyone who looks like they belong gets a pass. Anyone who doesn't, well, we'll be too scared to call." "No," Lawrence said. "That's the first decent fear you've had. Be afraid. To call when you don't know. Be brave enough to ask a name." "Easy to say," she shot back. "What about when it goes wrong?" Holt stood. Not to be dramatic. To be useful. "I've worn this badge 30 years, he said, voice deep enough to steady the cheap ceiling tiles. "I've responded to calls that saved someone, and calls that were a neighbor's temper with a phone bill. Yesterday was the second kind. If we had left in handcuffs a man standing on his own land because someone didn't like how he looked in a window, that would have been on us. This policy gives us a chance to be smarter before we're loud." Bradley cleared his throat. "And, for what it's worth, ma'am, it helps us too. We're not there to finish your arguments. We're there to stop crimes." Janice stared at them like the script didn't include this scene. For the first time since she'd stepped into the room, the clipboard lowered. Her shoulders dipped, by a fraction, as if truth had weight after all. "Fine," she said. But it wasn't surrender. It was a promise to look for a new hill. Gerald closed the meeting, and nobody clapped because nobody deserved it. People filed past Lawrence, some offering quick thanks, some offering quiet apologies, some avoiding his eyes like they weren't ready to be people yet. Maya pressed a receipt into his hand, voided signage order, and a sticky note. "Coffee's on me, if you drink the kind not made in a boardroom." Holt and Bradley waited by the door like regular men. "Appreciate what you said," Lawrence told Holt. "Appreciate what you didn't," Holt replied. "You could have burned the room down. You didn't." Bradley shifted his cap. "Sir, about yesterday. I'm still thinking about it." "Good," Lawrence said. "Think until it turns into habit." Outside, the sky was bright and unbothered. The cul-de-sac returned to its theater of small chores. Someone hosed a driveway that wasn't dirty. Someone checked a mailbox they'd already checked. Someone took a picture of nothing because sometimes that's what relief looks like. Lawrence didn't go home yet. He walked the fence line past Janice's yard. Her blinds twitched. He kept walking. He stopped at the gate and ran a hand along the cool metal bar his father had welded, each bead of steel a small prayer he hadn't earned, but still got to keep. Back. At the barn, the horses looked up like they'd been listening through the walls. "It's not over," he said to nobody. "It's just straighter." The videos didn't stop just because a room behaved. They traveled. An aunt posted them on a page about lessons for the next generation. A city paper grabbed a still and wrote a headline that tried to be clever, and failed. A law professor clipped Lawrence's line about respect and tweeted it over a thread about the difference between governance and theater. The HOA's inbox filled with messages from strangers who included their own source stories, some useful, some not, all of them loud. Janice tried to respond in the only place she felt taller, next door. She wrote about safety, about vigilance, about community standards in the face of intimidation. It read like a closing argument in a case she didn't have. The thread went sideways fast, as threads do when the facts aren't on their side. Eleanor posted the policy the board had just passed. Maya posted the vote count. Holt, carefully, posted nothing. At dusk, a pickup rolled into the cul-de-sac with a magnetic sign on the door. "Precision Fence and Gate." Two men hopped out and started measuring the HOA path near the ranch's entrance. Lawrence watched from the timberline, calm but awake. Old habits moved inside him, the kind that take a long breath before they ask the right question. "Afternoon," he called, voice friendly enough to be fair, loud enough to be a record. "What are we building?" One of the men checked his tablet. "Work order. Install decorative bollards at path entry. For safety." He pointed at the line in a sketch. The bollards sat exactly where the gate swing needed to arc. "Who signed it?" Lawrence asked. "Shoreline Standards Chair," the man said, tapping the screen. Kettering. Of course she had. Lawrence didn't threaten. He didn't posture. He looked at the sketch, looked at the hinge, looked at the distance between sense and spite. "Mind giving me 30 minutes?" he asked. "I'll get you a document that will pay you to install them somewhere they won't become exhibits in a lawsuit." The foreman, a practical man who had watched too many neighborhoods do dumb things with metal, shrugged. "We'll grab a soda," Lawrence texted Maya, then Gerald, then Holt. He didn't need all three. He got all three. Holt arrived first. Off duty, no badge, the kind of authority that doesn't need a patch. Maya arrived with a folder because she was learning who she was in emergencies. Gerald arrived sweating, gavel in his pocket like a habit he couldn't give up. "Bollards?" Gerald gasped, reading the work order like it had insulted him. "Exactly where a fire truck needs to turn if your clubhouse ever gets the wrong kind of attention," Lawrence said. "Exactly where an ambulance would like not to meet a decorative pole." Holt took a photo. "City fire code says clear swing," he muttered. "Ask me how I learned that." Maya pulled a page from her folder. Easements again, the HOA path again, the line where permission ended. "We can put them back by the bench," she said. "They'll look better and not block anything." Gerald called the foreman over. "Change. Order," he said, with the relief of a man who almost stepped into a hole he had dug himself. "Bench side." The foreman nodded, grateful for a day that would end with all his trucks intact. The men moved their tape. The neighborhood exhaled, in the way people do when a dumb thing dies before it gets a chance to grow up. Janice stood in her yard, cell phone held low, pretending not to film. Pretending is hard work. She didn't wave. She didn't speak. She watched her plan turn into something that didn't belong to her anymore. Night came again. Quieter. This time. Without sirens. Without a crowd. Lawrence walked the fence once more, because habit is how you tell the land you mean it. He stopped by the gate and looked out at the cul-de-sac and the small lives within it, trying to be better than there. Worse days. His phone buzzed one more time. An unknown number. He let it ring twice in case it was a survey. Then answered anyway because lately the world had been using phone calls like doors. "Mr. Duval?" a woman asked, voice crisp, curious, like work that mattered. "Marisol Vega, County Infrastructure. Heard you might be interested in a joint session, County, HOA, and your office." "Interested," he said. "Very. Good," she replied. "Because we'd like to do one before the next storm decides whether your neighborhood learned anything." He smiled into the dark. "They're learning." "We'll see," she said, not unkind. "Thursday, 6. "I'll bring the map," he said. "Bring the truth," she replied. "Maps are just where it likes to sit." He hung up, leaned on the gate, and listened to the quiet. It wasn't the kind of quiet that means nothing is happening. It was the kind that means something. Finally is, tomorrow would be louder again. Meetings tend to echo. Pride tends to rearrange itself. But for now, the land was the land. The fence was the fence. And a man in worn boots had managed to turn a siren into a sentence people could live with. The horses shifted. The barn settled. A star blinked in a sky that didn't care about bylaws. He thought about the line he hadn't said out loud yet, the one he would need later when the room forgot itself. You can't weaponize rules and call it community. You can't outsource your conscience to a committee and call it safety. You can't build a neighborhood by narrowing the definition of neighbor. He went inside, turned off the light, and let the night do what night has always done to men who choose patience over volume. It handed him back a morning he could use. Would the videos stop? No. Would Janice? Not yet. Would the subdivision become a utopia? Never. But the path had moved. The next call would be slower. The next accusation would have to step over a map that finally had names on it, and when the next storm came and it would, maybe a gate would swing without meeting a pole. Maybe a lid would open, because lilies weren't planted where mechanics needed to breathe. Maybe a deputy would read a policy and decide to knock before he knocked someone down. Maybe. Sometimes maybe is enough to sleep on. Sometimes it's how you build a better morning. Lawrence set his phone face down and let the ranch do the last talking. It said what it always says when men remember they're stewards, not owners. Welcome back. Don't waste it. The Thursday. Meeting wasn't supposed to feel like a trial, but by the time the sun sank behind the mesquites and porch lights blinked on, the air around the clubhouse had the tension of a courthouse without the marble. Cars lined the street. People walked briskly, as if arriving late might mean missing a confession. Inside, the folding chairs had been set in straight rows that tried and failed to look official. The county flag leaned in the corner. A projector hummed like a nervous witness. Gerald sat at the head table, gavel within reach. Maya stacked reports into neat, trembling towers. And on one side sat Marisol Vega, county stormwater official, her badge clipped to her blazer, her eyes sharp enough to cut excuses into ribbons. Lawrence entered quietly, boots echoing against the tile, the blue folder tucked under his arm, as usual. He didn't need to clear his throat. His presence was enough. The room shifted, phones tilted, and for a moment, even Janice hesitated before lifting her clipboard like a shield she wasn't sure would hold. Marisol opened the session with no wasted syllables. We're here to discuss compliance with county, stormwater standards, recent obstruction of a control facility, and the subsequent misuse of law enforcement resources. Let's begin with the weir. The projector flicked to life. On the screen, photographs of the weir box, lid half buried under mulch, lily roots snaking across the edges, the infamous ceramic frog perched exactly where an emergency release key should have been. A ripple of embarrassed chuckles moved through the crowd, but the photos silenced them just as quickly. This, Marisol said flatly, pointing at the screen, is tampering. Whether intentional or not, it violates County Code Section 14.3, obstruction of stormwater infrastructure. Had the storm persisted, your path would have flooded, your slope would have failed, and your HOA would be facing state investigation. Today, all eyes slid to Janice. Her cheeks reddened, but her jaw stayed rigid. We were beautifying, she muttered. Marisol's eyebrow arched. Beautification ends where safety begins. Plant lilies elsewhere. Not on a mechanical lid. Lawrence finally spoke, his voice steady, calm enough to demand listening. I warned them. They didn't want to hear it. Janice shot back, louder now. You act like you're the savior here. You've been absent for years. Nobody knew you. Nobody saw you. And suddenly you walk in claiming authority over every HOA in the country? It sounds like a fairy tale. Lawrence didn't look at her. He looked at the crowd. Authority isn't a fairy tale when it signs your rules. Every covenant you've cited to find someone for a mailbox color, every bylaw you've quoted about lawn length, those aren't bedtime stories. They come through my office. Through my signature. You live under them because I approved them. Gasps, whispers, phones held higher. Gerald rubbed his temples, as if the weight of being caught between Janice's stubbornness and Lawrence's truth might crush him. Maya leaned forward, voice softer but cutting all the same. He's telling the truth. I checked. His name's on the filings. The room rustled. People who had doubted the night before now shifted uneasily, guilt pressing into their ribs. Enough theatrics, Marisol snapped, shutting the room like a book. We're here for facts. Fact, Mr. Duval's ownership of Parcel 19B is recorded. Fact, His easement rights grant him authority to maintain the weir and shoreline. Fact, the HOA overstepped. So now we decide compliance or penalties. Gerald coughed. Compliance? Of course, immediate. But Janice wasn't done. She slammed her clipboard on the table. You're letting him dictate to us. He's weaponizing rules, twisting words, trying to humiliate this board. What precedent does that set? Lawrence finally turned to her, his patience sharpened into something harder. Weaponizing rules? That's your specialty, Mrs. Kettering. You dialed 911 because you didn't recognize the man unlocking his own gate. You treated suspicion as fact. You used officers as props for your pride. That's weaponization. What I've done is nothing but uncover lines you refuse to see. A low hum spread across the room. Some nodded. Some winced. Even Holt, seated in the back row off duty, tilted his head as if to say, that landed. Marisol folded her arms. The county's decision, the HOA will remove all obstructions, regrade the path, submit updated as-builts, and adopt a verification policy before involving law enforcement. 30 days. Fail, and fines escalate. Gerald exhaled like a man who had been underwater too long. Understood. Janice's face was crimson now. She rose, clipboard trembling. This is a sham. We're letting one man own absentee control, our community. What happens when he leaves again? What happens when he ignores us? Lawrence stood slowly, not loud, not fast, but deliberate enough that every eye turned. He set the folder on the table, pressed his palms against the wood, and leaned forward just enough for his words to carry without shouting. What happens when I leave? You'll still have maps. You'll still have deeds. You'll still have rules that tell you where yours stop and mine begin. The only question is whether you'll have learned to respect them. The room froze. Even Janice had no comeback. Gerald tapped the gavel once, a sound closer to surrender than order. Meeting adjourned. Neighbors filed out, whispering, shaking heads, sending texts they thought were private but weren't. Holt lingered, nodded once at Lawrence, then left without a word. Bradley gave a small salute with 2 fingers, sheepish but real. Outside, the air was cooler. The storm-swept sky washed clean. Lawrence walked the length of the path, boots crunching gravel. The weir lid gleamed under fresh caution tape. For the first time in weeks, the pond looked exactly as it should, still, patient. Waiting, but the quiet didn't fool him. He knew storms better than most. He knew Janice's pride wouldn't go down without one last fight. And he knew the next battle wouldn't be fought with lilies or deputies. It would be fought with paper, with signatures, with the kind of rules people twist until they break. He paused at the gate, resting his hand on the steel bar his father welded years ago. The night hummed with cicadas, the land breathing the way land always does after drama burns itself out. This isn't over, he murmured, but next time, they'll know where the line is drawn. And for the first time in a long time, he allowed himself a small, private smile. By Friday evening, Willow Point felt different. The sidewalks looked the same, the mailboxes stood in the same neat rows, and the pond still caught the light the way it always had. But under the surface, something had shifted. The neighbors who had once whispered in Janice's defense now whispered about her. The people who once crossed the street to avoid Lawrence's gate now slowed their steps, as if curiosity had softened into respect. Videos from the meetings had spread further than anyone expected. A clip of Lawrence saying, "Suspicion isn't safety." Its laziness dressed like law had gone viral. Local news anchors replayed it with raised eyebrows. One legal podcast dissected the confrontation frame by frame, calling it a textbook case of authority meeting arrogance in suburbia. Even the sheriff's office issued a short statement reminding residents to verify before you vilify. Inside her house, Janice seethed. Her next-door posts had backfired. Her allies had dwindled. Even her husband, normally a silent shadow, had muttered, "Maybe you should sit the next one out." But Janice wasn't built to sit out. She was built to fight, even if it meant fighting the wrong battle until the end. Lawrence, meanwhile, returned to the rhythm of the land. Each morning he walked the fence line, checking for breaks. Each evening he fed the horses, the sound of their breathing steadier than any policy. He didn't gloat, he didn't boast. He let the quiet speak for him. But he knew pride rarely, surrendered gracefully. He knew Janice had one last card. It came the following week in the form of an envelope slipped under his gate. Official letterhead, HOA crest embossed. A cease and desist order accusing him of misrepresentation, of authority, and unauthorized interference in board operations. Signed, of course, by Janice herself as Shoreline Standards chair. Lawrence read it once, twice, then folded it carefully and slid it into the blue folder with every other piece of paper that mattered. That evening, he drove into town, walked into the county courthouse and filed a petition. Not to punish, to clarify, to put into record what had been true all along. The hearing drew a crowd larger than the clubhouse could hold. Reporters lined the benches, neighbors filled the aisles, deputies stood at the back in quiet solidarity. Holt nodded at him when he entered. Bradley gave a small smile, and Maya waved nervously from the front row, binder in her lap. When the judge called the case, Janice rose first, armed with her clipboard and a stack of accusations. She spoke of safety, of standards, of strangers with unchecked power. Her words were sharp, but they cracked under their own weight. Then Lawrence stood. He didn't need theatrics. He carried only the blue folder. He laid out the deed, the plats, the letters, the filings, paper stacked like stone. And then he spoke, steady and unshaken. "I am not here to win an argument. I am here to remind this room of something simple. Ownership is not suspicion. Authority is not intimidation, and respect cannot be optional." The judge leaned forward. "Mr. Duval, do you, in fact, hold the position you've described?" Lawrence handed over the letter, stamped and signed by the National Homeowner Association Board. The seal gleamed under the fluorescent lights. The judge studied it, then looked up. "Confirmed." A hush spread. Phones caught the moment, and Janice's face drained of color. The ruling was brief. The HOA's cease and desist was voided. A formal reprimand was issued against the board for misuse of authority. New training requirements were mandated for every officer, and most importantly, the judge ordered that the county plat maps be distributed to every homeowner with clear language. This is where your rights end. This is where your neighbors begin. Outside the courthouse, neighbors gathered around Lawrence. Some offered apologies, others offered thanks. One woman said softly, "I've lived here 10 years and never said hello. I should have. I'm sorry." Lawrence nodded. "It's not about apologies. It's about respect. Start today." Even Holt approached, off duty but still carrying the weight of his badge. "You taught more in 2 weeks than I've seen in 30 years of calls," he said. Lawrence shook his hand. "Then maybe next time, someone will knock before they dial." Janice slipped out the side door, her clipboard clutched tight, her pride crumbling in silence. She didn't look back. Weeks passed. The subdivision settled into a quieter rhythm. The new policies were printed, the plat maps framed in the clubhouse, and the HOA meetings grew shorter, less combative. People began waving at Lawrence when he walked the fence line. Some even stopped to ask questions, real ones, without suspicion behind their eyes. The pond reflected it all, the storm, the calm, the shift. One evening, Lawrence stood at the gate, hand on the steel bar his father had welded decades ago. The sky was streaked with gold, the horses nudged at his sleeve, and for the first time in a long time, he felt the land breathe easy. He thought of his father's words. "This land doesn't just feed cattle. It feeds the soul. And he realized that maybe, just maybe, respect worked the same way. He turned back toward the barn, his boots steady on the gravel, the weight of the blue folder lighter now. The battle was over. The lesson remained, because in the end, communities don't survive on suspicion. They survive on trust, on truth, on respect that runs deeper than bylaws and stronger than pride. And that was something even the loudest HOA Karen couldn't call the cops on.